Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Actions Live Thursday question and answer show. Thank you for joining us this week. I'm already looking at the chat and I see so many familiar names and faces. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this week. Today's show is called Sabotage 2026, Why the Empire Needs to Crush the Midterms. I'm pretty sure, actually, I don't know what people see anymore. So Trump on Tuesday held a special meeting with the RNC with the, I believe senators were there too, with the RNC. Okay, and in that discussion, he basically made the case about why the midterm election is basically the most important thing the Republican Party has to work on right now. The amount of chaos that's coming up, political chaos that's coming up, what happened last night, yesterday in Minnesota, all this chaos that's coming up, very unfortunate incident, by the way, terrible that it happened. All this stuff is coming up. It's designed to put doubts in the minds of everyone. It's designed to fracture MAGA. It's going to get people talking about it. Already have some toxic personalities on the right wing, saying all kinds of dumb stuff. And there's all kinds of toxic stuff that's coming up on the left too. I just saw a tiny bit of it. All right, but that's not it. We have Venezuela, questions about Venezuela coming in too. Paul, thank you very much. Okay, so today we have a little bit of a different show. We're joined by Susan Kokinda. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we have Mike Stager. Mike hosts our Monday shows, our Monday strategic updates. Some of you have already probably seen him speak before. Mike's been doing this for longer than I have. So Mike, thank you for joining us on the show today. And Barbara's just taking a break. She should be back next week. So any opening words, Susan or Mike, any opening comments before we get into the questions that we've collected this week?
Yeah, I want to drill down on what you just sort of opened up with, Adam, because I think it's really important that everybody constantly take a step back and remember where we are in history. Donald Trump is challenging the globalist imperial system like we have never seen in our lifetime. He's doing it in foreign policy. He's doing it in an incredible way with economic policy. Just in the past couple of days, he's unleashed against the insurance cartels, the housing building cartels, or rather the investment companies that are scooping up single-family homes. He's going after the beef cartels. He's going after the defense contractors. You have never seen anything like, I mean, frankly, if you look at what Donald Trump is doing, this is, a left-wing Democrat's alleged dream. And as he said to the Republican congressman he spoke to yesterday, if you go with my policies, we will own them and we will win these absolutely critical midterm elections. So he's outlining a strategy which breaks the uniparty playbook, which breaks the globalist playbook. The Democrats, of course, as people have seen, their support rating is, rapidly sinking towards single digits. Obviously in Minnesota, they've got the albatross of this huge Somali fraud operation around their necks and so on. So what does it mean the elites have left? And all they have is, I would say, three things. War, which we'll address when we talk about Europe and Ukraine. Stupid Republicans who don't campaign the way that Donald Trump is telling them to campaign, and chaos. And that's really all I want to say about this shooting in Minnesota yesterday. I mean, it's clear that the Democrats and others want to create an environment where they can do their color revolution, as somebody just said in the chat, color revolution 101 type operations. And I think people have to look at all of these developments from the standpoint of this larger historical battle where Trump is doing something which, some of us old timers weren't sure we'd ever see in our lifetime, but it's actually happening, which is taking this system down. Mike, you might want to add your own thoughts.
Oh, I think what you've said is great. It's certainly a kind of colored revolution, given what these the Democrats are backed into a corner. They don't have a program. They don't have a policy. And the fraud in Minnesota and Minneapolis is just the tip of the iceberg. So California, Illinois, the big Democrat states are massive. When I was in California during COVID, it was $50 billion of unemployment fraud. That was known. It was recorded. So this is partly why they're just in such a panic. But I want to just put a focus on what President Trump is doing on the economic perspectives. We've got the smallest trade deficit this month since 2009. That's been a huge shift in terms of tariffs, in terms of GDP, in terms of economic investment in the United States. And the biggest question is that economics is not finance. It's not monetary. So real physical economy takes time, and you have to build it. And if you've built anything, most of the time you're doing preparation and foundation. You're not doing the stuff that everyone sees. The last year has been spent largely on structural changes, both internationally with the tariff and trade systems, as well as these questions of Venezuela, Iran, Ukraine, and Russia. But Trump's building a structure, including the capital investments, to give the United States a chance to really take off this year. And I think we've got to have more Republicans getting this message. As Susan just said, it's time to actually unleash the American economy and the American people. I think that was his message, and I think that's what we've got to communicate right now.
Thank you very much, Susan and Mike. Thank you very much to everyone who's coming in. As you're coming in on YouTube, please give us a quick like on the way in. That helps push our stream out to more people. And also an extra special thank you to people watching on x.com. I recently started my X profile about a month and a half ago now. Please give me a like if you enjoy this show. Please give me a follow if you enjoy this show. And again, thank you very much, our x.com supporters. Okay, so these questions that we're going to take come primarily from our email list. We do an email list. We're going to send you an email once every day. The questions are coming from those subscribers, but we also take live questions and answers. We take live questions from the super chats and from the chat. So before we begin there, I want to give a quick shout out to Melody Hart. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us every week. We appreciate your support. We are a viewer and reader funded organization. We don't have corporate sponsors. Thank you very much, Melody, for the support. We really appreciate it. So please give us a quick like on the way in. Thank you. And if you're on x.com, share the stream, please. Okay, so what topic are we going to take first? Are we going to take Venezuelan oil, I guess?
Yeah, let's start with Venezuela.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so thank you, Eve, for this question. I'm a bit confused as to how Mr. Trump is going to benefit from Venezuela's oil. Is it to drive down the cost of affecting other oil producers? Was it for the benefit of Americans to continue to have access to cheap oil? Was it about the petrodollar and how Maduro was selling his oil, bartering with the buyer instead of using the petrodollar? Thank you. Thank you for your question. So Mike or Susan, your thoughts?
Well, I'll just start by saying I think it's a little too narrow to look at the question of Venezuela simply from the standpoint of oil. I mean, you're asking some good questions and we can address those. But I think people have to look at what Trump has done from a much, much larger perspective and recognize that he really is committed to this principle of establishing especially a Western hemisphere of sovereign, stable, independent nations. And when you look at Venezuela, you have to start from the fact that it has not been a sovereign, independent nation. It has been under the control of the narco cartels, and with all the financial ties that they have back to the British Empire, especially through the offshore banking operations, the Caymans, and so on and so forth. So the question of Venezuela is, I'm just saying that people have to think about it from a much broader standpoint. Now, obviously, there are resources and raw materials in Venezuela, and Trump has been very clear. He wants these resources developed for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. Obviously, we will benefit by the appropriate trade relations and so on. But Venezuela used to be a very prosperous country. until Hugo Chavez and then his successor Maduro came in. And they've pretty much wrecked the Venezuelan oil industry. As I understand it, it's operating at about 20% of what its actual capacities are. So Mike may want to address some of the specifics that you put in your question, but I just wanted to locate it from that larger standpoint, because if you just try and figure out what Trump is doing from the standpoint of Venezuelan oil, you're not going to see the whole picture.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the biggest question is what Trump has said about the response to removing Maduro. And Trump is saying we're going to use the oil in Venezuela to benefit the Venezuelan people. That's not what's been done under Maduro. You've had a lack of infrastructure investment. You've had a lack of using it to develop Venezuela's economy. I mean, I think back a little bit to policies we had in Mexico back in the 1970s. There was a proposal under the president of Mexico then to use the oil to sell their oil reserves and use that as a capital investment to build up the infrastructure and industrial capacity in Mexico. And the globalists and deep state at that time said, we are going to have a Japan below our southern border. That we're not going to allow an advanced industrial economy to develop. Now think about what that means. In the 1970s, Mexico could have developed an advanced industrial base, been a key trading partner and a key security benefit to the United States, and none of this mass immigration would have taken place. Instead, with the policies that were enacted then, and then you add on NAFTA, which wiped out a lot of the corn production and food production and small farmers in Mexico, by this globalist free trade agenda, you basically destroyed and created kind of a vacuum rush of people who were basically plunged into poverty based on these globalist policies, who were then flooding into the United States, and the mass migration policies just kind of went crazy. I think Trump is reversing that. And to me, that is the core question of this. Everyone's saying regime change, and the neocons want Trump to put Machado in and put democracy in. Is it about the oil? Trump uses the oil question to come across as kind of a pragmatist. And that's fine. To sell this, to say what he's doing, to say it's not at the cost. It's not to the cost of the American people. We're not going to pay for this. We're not running this operation. This isn't going to be another $8 billion occupation program, or $8 trillion occupation program. But at core, Trump is reviving a system of sovereign nations. And that's the core question. And he's encouraging the new regime, which really isn't a new regime. He said it in an interview with the New York Times yesterday. The regime under Maduro, minus Maduro, is working and complying with all of our requests. And so he's saying, we need you to implement a policy of development in Venezuela. That's the core question that threatens the empire. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, and I think there was something announced in the last 20 hours or so that said the money, I don't know what exactly happened, but he said the money from the oil tankers, that Venezuela would be using that money to purchase American products. So I think that came out in the last 24 hours or so. I just went and looked that up. Okay, I'd like to give a quick shout out here to Josh Wilson. Thank you very much for the super chat. We love Promethean Action. It would be great to do a joint panel with the ladies of the Pop and Politics podcast. Okay, what are your thoughts on the drone swarm assassination attempt on Putin's residence and the oil tankers? Mike and Susan, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, obviously the empire wants to keep the situation tense between Russia and the United States. I don't think they're succeeding. The drone attack, of course, I think, as people know, came just as Trump was meeting with Zelensky, trying to push him over the edge in terms of getting a rational peace agreement with Russia. There's been some funny stuff coming out of the United States with the CIA saying there was no drone attack and Trump essentially endorsing that. I don't put a lot of stock into some of the things that Trump says on this, in the sense that he's constantly trying to throw people off guard, whether it's the people he's negotiating with or whether it's you. I think the issue with Russia is very, very clear. The Russians increasingly and publicly make clear that the United States is not the problem. The problem is Britain, and the problem is the European Union. And they are prepared to work with Trump, and they see a future relationship of economic benefit with Trump. Trump says the same thing. In terms of the tankers, as I understand it, one of those tankers, they just hoisted a Russian flag pretty much at the last minute for who knows, whatever propaganda purposes. I don't think that there's seriously an escalation of tension between the United States and Russia. I also think that much of what is going on with the United States and Russia and China, you are not seeing publicly, and you are not going to see publicly.
Thank you. And Josh, if you know, like, and this goes generally with any kind of podcast, if you know, like a producer on a podcast, please let us know. Get in touch with us. If you have some inside track, we'd be more than happy to get on other podcasts. So if you, Josh Wilson, if you know somebody at the Pop and Politics, please reach out to us, reach out to them. We'd be happy to be on if it's a good match. So thank you very much for the question. Mike, any questions or comments on this?
Oh, just mostly, I think a lot of these actions are just total desperation by the war party, as Susan said.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone in the chat. So much support. Thank you for joining us, and also X.com. I saw a bunch of people sharing it. Thank you very much, guys, for sharing it here. Okay, we're going to continue on this theme because everyone's still thinking about it and talking about it. And this is from Pauline. Thank you very much, Pauline, longtime supporter. I'm going to kind of paraphrase the question here, but it kind of comes on similar lines here. I've heard that Russia, or more specifically Putin, is displeased with Trump's takedown of Maduro. The following is taken from Dr. Malone. Okay. So Trump's, okay, so is it true? Okay, so is it true that Putin is angry at Trump's takedown of Maduro? We have some things here. Malone's News, January 5th, Venezuela functions as Latin American manufacturing node that reduces Iran's logistical and political exposure. Okay, so independent institutional open source coverage of strategic truth. Venezuelan state manufacturer publicly showcased drones, other known as clearly identical to the Iranian versions. Iranian engineers were confirmed to be present under technical cooperative agreements. Okay, so there seems to be a partnership here between what Maduro is doing and there was some kind of Iranian alignment. The partnership coincides with other Iranian drone export hubs in Russia, Tajikistan, and Syria. Okay.
I think there's a second question, which is similar, and we can probably just put them together. I think.
Putin has put out there that the capture of Maduro means war. Do we need to worry? Thank you, Tammy. And thank you, Pauline, for your question. What's the relationship now between the United States and Putin now that this capture has happened?
I don't think anything has fundamentally changed in terms of the United States and Russia. You sort of have two different tracks. You have the people who are analyzing it from the standpoint that Russia must be constantly, forever hostile to the United States. Therefore, anything Russia was doing with Venezuela was hostile to the United States, which I don't think is the way the world works. Now, Russia, and China obviously were trying to advance their own interests economically, and there were a lot of arms sales and so on between these countries. But I don't think it follows that because Russia was active in Venezuela, it means it is doing this against the United States. I think that's the old British geopolitical thinking. Trump is in a new world. We're in a new world. And the Russians have acknowledged and welcomed the fact that we're in a new world. The fact that that Putin himself referenced Trump's national security strategy as a change in strategic direction, which is different from Europe and really different from the British geopoliticians. I think is still the guiding dynamic in this whole thing. Now, Iran is a slightly different story. I mean, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, had major operations in Venezuela, and that is an entity which I would not put, in a similar category as Russia. That's an entity that tends to have more actual hostility toward the United States because of its origins. I would point people ultimately to its origins as an arm of British irregular warfare, but that's a longer story. Venezuela was a staging ground for a lot of nasty operations. But I go back to what I said at the beginning. What Trump understands, what you have to understand, is that this was not a staging ground for nasty operations from Russia, China, Venezuela, or for that matter, even Iran. This was a staging operation for the British Empire to run drugs, human trafficking, terrorism, illegal immigration, other forms of warfare against the United States. And I think the sober leaders in the world, which certainly includes Putin and includes Xi Jinping, understand exactly what Trump did in Venezuela. Now, they may have to say certain things, at the UN and otherwise for diplomatic purposes. But I think the fundamental understanding coming out of both of these countries is that Donald Trump is not a globalist. And while there's going to be tensions and disagreements, this is a different way of approaching foreign policy, which is sovereign nation to sovereign nation. So that's what I would say. Mike?
Yeah, I got to think that's the core question. The British set up the Iranian regime. The British largely sponsored the Chavez regime in Venezuela. And these were basically playgrounds for exactly what Susan described. I think you look at what Trump did in his first term with North Korea and Kim Jong-un, and his sense of willing to negotiate, to discuss peace, to walk into North Korean territory was a kind of one of those blatant indications of Trump's courage and commitment to peace. Even on the question of Venezuela, when he was asked on Air Force One, why did you do this? And he said, it's a question of peace on earth. It's a question of the Monroe Doctrine that too many presidents have forgotten, but it's a question of peace on earth. The Iranian regime celebrates 4 times a year Death to America. This regime was propped up and set up by globalist British imperial policy. So we have every interest in clearing these problems up. When people say this isn't America first, it just seems like they don't see the bigger fight. That getting regimes in these areas that are committed to the interests of their population and not some ideology is the core question of reestablishing a system of nation states. Because once these regimes are gone, North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela are now committed to the interests of their people. Regardless of who's in power, that the commitment is to the development of their nation, then the ability to collaborate with Russia and China is going to be far different. And the pressure on Europe and on the British in general is going to change dramatically. And I think that's what Trump sees. I think that's what his foreign policy team sees, that we've got to get these problems, these festering wounds off the table so we can focus on the long-term game.
Thank you very much, Susan and Mike, for your answers. I would like to give a quick shout out here to David D. Shaw 1776. Thank you very much for the generous super chat. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. We do 3 political updates a week. We do a political update on Monday, one on Wednesday, one on Saturday, and we have this live show on Thursday at the same time. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the bell notification icon. You'll get a notification when we do our next political briefing on Saturday. If you're just joining us on YouTube, please drop a quick like on the way in. It helps our distribution while the show is going live. And I asked him to send in a question or a comment, and I'm going to read his comment, and maybe we could talk a little bit about more of what the significance of this is. But Minnesota is going to destroy us in America and the movement today now. Well, David, if you're are you in Minnesota? Are you in one of those areas? Because that's I mean, being in that situation, I'm not even following what's going on the ground right now. But I'm sure that's going to totally distort your worldview about what's going on. But I'm worried about this kind of stuff really causing more tension in the political process in general. So Susan and Mike, please, any thoughts on these kinds of, and I don't think this is some kind of direct, this is not some kind of like operation. I don't think she was programmed or like told. The unfortunate person who passed away, it's terrible, right? I don't think that it was some kind of special operation that was sent to destroy the Trump movement. But this is what happens when you target, you know, when the left keeps saying ICE is the problem. They keep, you know, I think they call it stochastic terrorism now, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, this isn't our first rodeo in terms of this kind of chaos operation. We saw it in terms of the summer of George Floyd. We've seen it many, many other times before. There's no question that this is coming right out of the color revolution playbook. But color revolutions only work, you know, if people get caught up in the actual operation itself, rather than understanding where it's coming from. I don't think Minnesota is going to destroy us as long as people, you know, keep their heads on straight and constantly keep focusing on, as we've already said, the fact that the enemy is extremely desperate right now. Now, that does make them dangerous. That does mean they're going to do crazy things. I was listening to somebody just a few minutes ago, a retired brigadier general who's got a pretty good beat on things, and he was talking about stuff, and he was warning about a false flag. I saw something like that in the chat too. I wouldn't doubt that the enemy is planning something like that. But the question is, even if they pull it off, is it going to have its desired psychological effect? Or are there going to be enough of us who actually understand this kind of irregular warfare and don't fall into their escalation plans and keep people focused on the real fight, which is that Trump is in the process of liberating the United States from this British imperial elite system and establishing a world of sovereign nations. So if you look at it from the standpoint that we're winning and they're desperate, yeah, it's going to be dangerous. And probably there are going to be other casualties in the course of this, you know, as there are in any kind of war. But if you recognize that it's coming from their desperation and the fact that we're on the offensive, it ultimately isn't going to work.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, I know how emotionally charging these issues are, especially when you're jacked into the news cycle. Right? I know how emotionally charged it is, but I just put a comment up on the screen. That's the thing. You have to, in times of great stress, you need to keep your head on straight. And the people that are able to keep their heads on straight in times of great stress are the ones that walk away victorious in war generally. I want to give a quick shout out here to Tony Packard. Okay, Tony says, contrary to some posters here, Putin himself has said nothing about the Venezuela op for the reasons given here. So thank you, Tony. Tony's a longtime collaborator and supporter. Thank you, Tony, for their fact check here. It was funny because I didn't hear Putin say much about it myself, but thank you, Tony, for confirming that. And another quick shout out here to Marina Herrera. Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan. Okay, this is Barbara. Susan should be back with us next week. Thank you, Susan and Barbara. I'm getting dyslexic here. I'm sorry. I am dyslexic and neurodivergent. I'm dead serious. I totally am. That was coming out there. Thank you, Susan. Your insights has helped me so much in truly understanding the big picture and President Trump's moves and motives. Thank you very much, Marina. Please make sure you're subscribed to our free newsletter. The link is in the description. You can also just search for Promethean Action, get our free newsletter, stay in contact with us. outside of the control of social media. Our newsletter email is still the best way for us to stay in contact outside of the control of social media. Yes, I know Gmail and the different services, they filter and do everything, but that's still the best way to stay in contact with us. Please make sure you get our free email newsletter, and we really appreciate the support. We are reader supported. And I have another one here from Daniel Keller. Thank you. Please make sure you're subscribed. Love your content. We love that you're joining us and that we're able to have such a transformative effect on everyone. We get messages every single day, people describing how much we've transformed their understanding of the world. And we're very blessed and honored that you would let us into your lives and allow us and give our ideas some consideration. So thank you very much, Daniel. Again, make sure subscribe to our free newsletter. Links in the description. Stay subscribed. Okay, we have so many questions here, guys. I want to say we had over 100 questions this week. We simply can't answer them all. We simply can't. So I'm very sorry if we don't take your question directly. Susan and I and Michael, we did read every single one, so we know what's on your minds. Thank you for opening up to us. Okay, what topic are we going to take next?
Why don't we move on to the next batch of foreign policy ones like Greenland and Denmark? There was a second clump of foreign policy.
Yes. Okay. I'm looking at them now. Actually, you know what? Let's take on an interesting one here. Hold on a second here. Yes. I think this is going to be a very challenging. And Valerie, thank you so much for joining us. Again, Valerie's a long-time supporter. Thank you for joining us every week and for this question. I have a group of friends that are very strict supporters of the Constitution. They are very upset by Trump taking action in Venezuela because they say it was unconstitutional. Here's one comment. West Virginia's creation was totally unconstitutional and shows the hypocrisy of the Lincoln administration. As for enforcing our laws overseas, and specifically in this case, you still can't take offensive action against a head of state, legitimate or not, without approval from Congress, as shitty as they are. We can defend ourselves all day long without approval from Congress, but anything beyond that takes Congress, and it doesn't necessarily mean a declaration of war. It could be some lesser actions. The 10th Amendment Center covers the first 4 presidents' philosophy on this, which accords with the Constitution. Looking to the precedent is a terrible idea for the same reason it's terrible when South Carolina SC relies on it rather than the Constitution. If Trump's actions don't concern you, then his comments after should. What has happened to America first? Yes, Venezuela stole some oil and property from us 20 years ago, but the oil overall is theirs, not ours. And I'm hearing Maduro's people are still running the show, so our boots on the ground may very well be opposed. How about we focus on getting communist and Islamist radicals out of our country? They are more experienced in studying the Constitution than I am. I stated that there are many precedents for the action in 5. I tried to get them to see the bigger picture, as you discussed, that Trump is crushing the globalist order, and he succeeded. But I am torn too. If we don't follow our Constitution fully, it gives rise to further departure from our constitutional basis. What are your thoughts on this issue? Okay, I think I understand here. So this, first off, I don't agree with everything this person's saying. This person's kind of making it sound like it was over property and war. That's a little bit ridiculous. And second of all, I think this was a certain amount of self-defense, because if you understand the drug issue and the drug coordination issue, this actually was in self-defense. So I know this person says they're a constitutionalist and they probably have a very legal definition. Mike and Susan, your thoughts on this constitutional question. Does Trump have the constitutional authority to do what he did in Venezuela?
Mike, I'll throw that one to you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, he certainly does. The drugs was an existential question. It's killed more people in the United States over the last 20 years in any war we've ever engaged in. So the question of Venezuela was it was a total narco state. The states of Mexico and South America have increasingly become compromised. Mexico certainly stands out. But the Venezuela situation, there was no cooperation from Maduro in terms of addressing this. He'd become part of this kind of embedded British imperial operation. So Trump put out, and his national security strategy lays it out very clearly. We want to work with you. We want to create trade. We want to create industrial development. We want to nearshore some of our supply chains. We want you integrated into the advanced industrial economy of the United States. But if you're not willing to do that, if you're going to stick with this hardcore drug and kind of narco trafficking and human trafficking agenda, which is basically the black economy, and it dominates many parts of the world. Much of the oligarchs have made their trillions largely off of this kind of illicit trade. If you're going to continue with that kind of agenda, we're going to have to shut it down. We just have to. It's critical for the survival of your people and of our nation and of really the world as a whole. You can't allow that kind of activity to continue. I mean, the idea that, West Virginia was unconstitutional things just pushes aside all of the major, bigger principled questions. The Confederacy was itself an existential threat to the country. So is this British imperial deployment. So I think, look, if we try to play by the rules of an international order, Susan addressed this in one of her videos. If we try to play by their rules, their liberal imperial game, then we're not going to win. But if you're just having reflex towards what we did in Iraq and Libya and Syria and so on over the last, Bush and Obama years, then look, Trump is not those presidents. Trump has threatened their regime entirely in the United States. And if that's not going to be internalized, if you can't see that Trump has waged a revolution inside American foreign policy apparatus, and that's why they've tried to kill him. That's why they tried to put him in jail. It wasn't because he was too much. I mean, some people try to say that the problem with Trump is that he made the imperial game too obvious. That's not the reason he's the threat. He's a threat because he's threatening their imperial game. And he's willing to use tough tactics to wage war on their agenda. And I think that really is the main question.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everyone in the chat and everyone that's tuning in. Thank you very much for joining us every Thursday. Just a quick recap. If you're new here, this is Promethean Action's live question and answer show. We do this live show every Thursday, but we also have 3 political updates a week that we do. We're trying to do more stuff too. We're working on it. Definitely working on it. Right now we're doing 3 live shows. We also have, Mike does, we publish it after the fact, but Mike does a live show every Monday too. So, but we have 3 live shows here a week. We have 3 political updates here on Promethean Action Updates. Please subscribe to our channel. Our next one is going to be on Saturday. So hit the bell icon and get a notification when we release our next video on Saturday. Okay. All right. Let's take, we actually have, we got a bunch of questions today. We definitely resonated in Canada. We did a video with Canada was directly the issue of the video. So we got a lot of stuff. So we're going to have some good questions in here from our Canadian friends up north. And thank you very much for joining in this fight here. The Canadian government is infiltrated by China and the Mexican cartels. This seems like a bigger threat than Venezuela. We have the 3rd largest oil reserves. Why is President Trump allowing this threat on his border? There are many Trump supporters here willing to help. The elections are rigged. The media is bought off. We need help. Thank you, Peter. Peter, we hear you. And let me, since we have so many Canada questions, let me take this next one here from Todd. Being a resident of Canada, we have seen such a mere march towards authoritarianism under the Trudeau and Carney governments with strong ties to the City of London and China, including allowing the PLA to train multiple times in the Canadian Arctic and easy flow of drugs into the US. What actions do you think Trump will take to address the security issues stemming from Carney's government? Thank you, Todd. And I'm going to take this next one here from Christy. As a Canadian, thoroughly disappointed and very disgusted that Carney runs our beautiful country. How do I educate myself on this imperial system? There are lots of theories, both conspiracies and otherwise out there, and I need a real history lesson on this imperial system. Thank you, Christy, for your question. Mike and Susan, your thoughts on Canada and some of the history, and what should be the United States' relationship to the nation of Canada?
Well, there is a lot of history there. I mean, if things had worked out a little differently, Canada would already be part of the United States and we'd all be better off. But it didn't quite work out that way. Todd's previous question, I think, really hit the nail on the head when he identified the control of the British. I mean, look, Canada is still, the sovereign of Canada is still technically the King of England. So, you know, you don't have to have a conspiracy theory to figure that out. You know, and of course, the background of Mark Carney is pretty notorious. He's the only person on the planet who served both as the head of the Bank of Canada and the head of the Bank of England, and he's the only person ever in history where a non-Englishman was actually the head of the Bank of England, Carney being a Canadian. So when you're looking at Canada under Carney right now, you are literally seeing an outpost of the British imperial system. The steps that Canada has taken are, in terms of authoritarian type policies, parallel what are going on in Britain, parallel what is going on in Europe. I think Trump's approach to this is, I mean, he's not going to go extract every head of state. You know, I mean, because what he did, as Mike said, what we did with Maduro, these indictments had been sitting there for years and years and years. Maduro was indicted as somebody who was committing drug trafficking crimes against the United States. That's what made that extraction necessary and legal. You don't necessarily have those circumstances, you know, with other heads of state that you don't like. And we have a lot of heads of state that we don't like. So you're probably not going to see Apache helicopters anytime soon, you know, extracting Carney, or as some people have suggested, Keir Starmer in Britain, you know, on behalf of the United States. That's not how it's going to work. It's going to work the way Trump is doing it, as long as he has the backing of enough people to finish this, which is to completely reshape the battlefield. Now, you look at Canada, Canada ain't in good shape. Go back to the one aspect of Venezuelan oil we didn't bring up. Venezuelan oil is heavy oil. Canadian oil is heavy oil. If we start using Venezuelan oil, we may not need that much Canadian oil, and that's going to kick them right in the shins. Canada is not doing very well in terms of its tariff war with the United States. So I think the way that Trump is approaching these countries that are basically in imperial enemy hands is, you know, the full scope of the tools that he has at his disposal, economic, political, and elsewhere, where he's just going to be weakening them on many, many different flanks and creating the conditions where then people in those countries can organize an actual alternative to it. But I want to say one other thing from that standpoint, because we get similar questions from Australia, we get similar questions from the United Kingdom. It's one thing to know that your existing governments and the institutions that are in place are bad and are doing terrible things. It's another thing to know how to actually govern your country on the basis of proper principles. So I appreciate especially Christie's question here in terms of a history lesson on the imperial system, because I think the first thing that people in these other Commonwealth countries have to do is really equip themselves to understand the deeper principles of history. As Christie said, what is the difference between an imperial system and a system of sovereign republics? Because ultimately, to save Canada, to save England, to save Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere else, again, it's not going to be enough to get rid of the bad guys. You're actually going to need to know how to govern. And, we at Promethean Action do everything that we possibly can to educate you on those principles.
Yeah, just want to jump. I think we just have to state it that the greatest destructive force in Western civilization has been the British Empire. They were largely the cause of World War I and World War II. They created the Bolshevik Revolution. They created the Nazi Revolution in Germany. And they have basically been on a kind of jihad to destroy the principles of Western civilization for practically 140 years. When they realized the gig was up, when the United States won the Civil War and massively industrialized. And this became a fundamental game changer globally, because now their colonies in Asia were threatened by the rise of industrial nations like Japan and Russia. Europe was fundamentally disrupted because Germany and other nations were adopting industrial policies. And their goal, and you can read it in their own documents, in their own words, in their own kind of groups that were running the empire, their intention was the best way to save their empire, as they basically plunged Western civilization into kind of a civilizational civil war, was to rope the United States into the Commonwealth. They're explicit. That was their game. Winston Churchill says it in his Iron Curtain speech in Missouri, but they've been saying it since like 1880, 1890. That was the game. And in reality, under the globalist regime, certainly after the World War, after World War II, but then also after the Cold War, they basically had us. There was no presidential regime, or it was one regime regardless of president, for the last like 40 years. And that has been the problem until Trump disrupts it. Canada is a key front line of that Commonwealth. We saw that during COVID. We saw the lockdowns in New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. We saw that they're extremely totalitarian. But the reality is Trump pulled a kind of a coup in Australia, the rare earth mineral deal. Australia has a stronger element of wanting to break from the Commonwealth. I think it should be explicit US foreign policy to break the British Commonwealth, to let Canada and UK and New Zealand become independent sovereign nations, no longer dominions of the crown. This is a big problem with Canada in terms of its resources, its land use, its forestry. It's all controlled by the crown. You've got to break that up. But it's a long game. You're not going to do that right now. Right now, the core leverage to do that is going to be the kinds of relationships Trump's developing with Russia. And then the trade pressure. Susan said it. The pressure on Canada over trade is massive, And I don't think Carney's regime and this kind of British regime of Trudeau and Carney can survive if Trump keeps turning up the heat on the trade question, because their entire economy is dependent on that. And they're not going to replace it as much as Carney might try with Asia and these kinds of questions. But it also, we're going to get into Greenland. Greenland sits between Canada and Europe. If you look at a global map, Greenland's right in the middle. The question of breaking Canada from this British control, addressing the strategic threats of Europe, Greenland become critical in that fight. So I'll just tease that one for now.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much, Susan. We're going to be addressing. We'll take the Greenland question next. But before I do that, I'm gonna continue to take these questions on Minnesota, because I believe that it's important to address it and give our perspective on this issue, because I'm sure it is crashing over all the news cycles right now, especially if you live in a liberal city. Thank God I'm blessed I don't live in a super liberal city right now. But I let Oreo de Pup, thank you very much for joining us. I've seen you in this chat so many times. Thank you for the super chat here. I'm deeply distressed about Minnesota. I understand what's at stake with ICE, but discipline is 100% necessary. The tone-deaf response will ruin moderate vote. I'm not certain which will ruin Trump's moderate, the moderate vote for Trump, or the moderate vote for the Democrats.
For Trump.
So, Mike and Susan, your thoughts on Minnesota. And again, I bring this up because I know this is going to be on a lot of people's minds, and it's good to talk about it, because if you don't address these things, they start festering into big problems.
Well, Susan addressed it once. Let me just say, this kind of incident was inevitable. They had constant pressures, death threats, targeted ICE agents. We had the guy, the potential sniper, trying to shoot 2 of them. There's been constant attempts to run them over, to create confrontation. They've been supported by local and state and even federal elected officials, the protesters, to be more violent, to be confrontational, to disrupt this activity. ICE agents aren't violating the law. They're following and implementing the law. And that's the real freak out and crisis, because if you address the law, if you address the accountability on questions like welfare and government spending, like the administration did with USAID, you are blowing up the democratic game. The Somali and welfare fraud in Minnesota, the welfare frauds in places like California are directly financing the democratic apparatus. And the administration's targeting this. They're targeting Act Blue. So they've got to go for a bloody shirt situation. They've heightened and threatened it. And I think, as Susan said, we've got to keep calm heads. In some sense, I mean, the administration's been very kind of careful about this. Stephen Miller has said the fight for the United States. And in some sense, imagine them bringing in a whole army of ICE officers into Los Angeles. If you've been there or you saw the protests earlier this year, that's going to be absolutely crazy. This is where the threat lies for a kind of vigilante, violent, anarchistic kind of pushback. The administration knows it. I think we've got to be really tough. We've got to address this. We've got to push back. Yes, the officer, you could easily say the officer was too quick to pull his gun in that kind of situation. But if you just take that limited situation and not the broader context of constant death threats, of constant actual live threats, of constant aggression and physical provocations, using cars, using other types of confrontational devices, ways that you're confronting them, physically threatening these ICE officers, then you're going to get a situation where these guys feel kind of backed against a wall. And I think Trump is right to support them. I think we have to support them. We have to recognize we are fighting to pull our nation together and to apply our laws equally in our country. And that's where the resistance ultimately comes from.
Yeah, I just want to add, let's not forget, 2 National Guardsmen were shot and 1 killed only 2 months ago. So, our law enforcement people know that they're on the front lines. Nobody should be Monday morning quarterbacking in terms of what happened in that incident until there's a thorough investigation, a thorough professional investigation. But in the meantime, as Mike said, we've got to back up our law enforcement officers because they are targeted as part of this color revolution operation.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's hold on a second. Maybe you guys want to take this one real quick before we move on. Has Trump met his match with Mark Carney? I read a few days ago that Trump's tariff plan for Canada has been outwitted, but I haven't heard no more about it. Thank you, Sue, for the question and comment. Has Trump met his match with Mark Carney?
I think there's a typo there. Mark Carney has met his match in Donald Trump. So.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, we're going to take the question here on Greenland here. This one is, I think, really captured it. Actually, from a supporter too. So thank you, Yuta. I think it's probably pronounced Yuta. Thank you very much for being honest and telling us how you really think. And we'll give you our honest answer. I am Danish and I have been a Trump supporter all along, but now I am set with him because his intention of taking over Greenland. He wants Greenland because of security reasons. He does not at all mention the regards of the Greenland people. As a part of the Danish kingdom, the Greenland people have the same rights as Danish people in Denmark. And that is, among others, free healthcare, free education, all the way from ground school until the finish of university. Social Security, 5 weeks paid holiday a year. Does Trump at all care about giving the Greenland population these benefits? Or what? Or is the real reason for his Greenland takeover wannabe actually about minerals in the ground? Russia is not a threat. China is not a threat. He is making friends with both at the moment, isn't he? And he's been dismantling the bases in Greenland recently. I think, honestly, that he is behaving like a spoiled 5-year-old brat who has not been thinking of the consequences of his blabbering. He wants his new toy, Greenland. He wants it for free. If he wants to be taken serious, he should be talking and acting responsibly, because right now his reliability is hanging in a very thin thread. You can't just enact a part of another nation, a part of another nation by just calling it something else, like a colony or you name it. This is like Hitler annexing Sudetenland. And by the end, he will break his neck on this. And I want to know if there is actually some substance behind taking over Greenland. Since World War II, the United States has had full access to Greenland, so I do not see all the need at all. Best regards. Thank you very much for your question and comment. Mike and Susan, your thoughts.
Mike, you can take that one.
Okay. First of all, we're definitely achieving President Trump's agenda by discussing Greenland. That's what he wants most of all. Is he wants people discussing Greenland. He wants us discussing the positives and the negatives, because the more we talk about it, the more this project probably becomes fait accompli. Look, there's a couple of things here. One is, like in Canada, Greenland is basically part of the Commonwealth of Denmark. That's basically what this is. And these dominions, these territories, one, are in the Western Hemisphere, which is a direct violation of the Monroe Doctrine. British, European colonies, colonial practices and policies, whether they're globalist corporate or just outright colonial, are ultimately rejected under a Monroe and, of course, the Monroe Doctrine. So let's just be clear on that. But that doesn't mean, we can just go around and, airlifting Mark Carney, though that would be useful. Probably better to do King Charles. The second thing is that, what are the policies towards these areas? Non-development. They are part of the eco-terror agenda. No development, no use of resources, no industrialization, kind of the native peoples policy, the First Nations of Canada. It's to basically leave these areas undeveloped, unpopulated, without industrial or significant economic purposes. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean economic purposes like profits for corporations? No. It means economic development, like using resources to advance the well-being of the population and to create a deeper kind of spiritual and cultural orientation of growth and creativity in our culture, in our national culture and in human culture. We're part of creation. We're in the image of the Creator. And the idea is to subdue the earth, to deploy our resources, to deploy our talents, to respond in the capacity of the divine. That's the nature of mankind. That's not European colonial policies. That is not Europe's nation state. They don't even have nation states. It's not the European Union policy. Let me just, can I share? Do I hit present, Adam?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay. I'll just share a screen.
Yeah.
Oops, I probably just didn't do it right there. Share screen. Chrome tab. Okay, there we go. Oh, come on.
I see it.
Okay, so this is just, these are the expected, these are the current sea shipping routes in the Arctic. Obviously that's forecast for 2040 to 2059, but it just gives people a sense of the map. We have a warming planet. We have ice melting up in the northern parts. We can discuss whether that's good or bad. If you live in the northern parts, it's probably better, but like I do in Michigan. But the point is that this is a major area of economic integration between the United States and Asia and Russia. And the question of Europe today, and if you look at Trump's national security strategy, this is where the real threat is. The real threat is coming out of the European Union, the loss of a focus or a dignity of Western civilization within the nations of Europe. That's the real threat. And so from that standpoint, Trump is putting pressure on them to commit to developing their nations. And that means developing the areas that are going to be critical to global trade and global economics. In Greenland, if you just look at this map and you look at the increasing trade routes and activity in the Arctic, it's hard not to see the role of Greenland, both from a global strategic standpoint. One is a defense of Europe. I mean, Trump said it in the national security strategy. We have nuclear weapons in Europe, and you're going to have massive migration and total regime change based on a different cultural orientation. We can't trust this. This isn't consistent with non-proliferation. This isn't consistent with the well-being of civilization or your nations. So Greenland remains a critical part of the defense of the United States from this kind of globalist doctrine. It remains a question of economic development with resources to some degree, and largely part of an economic trade orientation for the world. It also represents a kind of, can I stop sharing now? How do I stop sharing?
Yeah, it stopped.
Oh, it stopped, okay. It also represents a chance to isolate and put even more pressure on Canada, which is to the well-being of our country and the world.
Yeah, and I'd also point out, there's a lot of hyperventilating going on in terms of Greenland. Nowhere has Donald Trump said, to my knowledge, that we're going to militarily take over Greenland. He's sending people there to discuss. And let's not also forget, the population of Greenland is less than 60,000 people. And it's actually been dropping. There have been declining birth rates. People leave because, as Mike said, this is obviously not exactly thriving under so-called Danish and European rule. So I think Trump's approach to this is pretty simple. Let's talk about how you might have a more vibrant society, in some kind of accommodation as an independent nation, as a protectorate, as, whatever, however. But again, I don't think, people should be getting their panties in a bunch over some kind of military takeover of Greenland.
Thank you, Mike and Susan. Thank you, everyone in the chat, for joining us. Thank you, everyone on x.com that's been sharing and watching. We really appreciate the support, and we couldn't have done any of this without you. I'd like to give another quick super chat shout out to Oreo. Oreo says Trump should give generous dividends to the Venezuelans and Latinos and natives from oil projects. The optics would make liberals speechless. Rich Latin countries means no more economic migrants.
Good thinking.
Any thoughts, Mike, maybe? I think that's the plan. I think his intention is to create a condition. He said to the New York Times, we might be in control of this dynamic for a few years, but it's basically controlling the guardrails by which the regime has to operate there, with the commitment to using their oil and natural resources to start building up Venezuela. It's in the national security strategy.
Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you very much, Oreo, for sending in your question and for the super chat. We really appreciate it. Okay, just a quick reminder here. These questions come from our email newsletter subscribers. The link to get our free email newsletter is in the description. Just subscribe for free. And then several times a week in our emails, I put the link to ask a question. So that's where these questions are coming from. I'm going to take another one here that's in a very similar thread as what you were just discussing, Mike. So this is from Chrissa. Can you show how the Monroe Doctrine has been used by President Trump now, and how past presidents allowed foreign countries to violate the Monroe Doctrine? Also, won't this put Israel at a disadvantage as they've been undermining our country? It seems Israel has been stealing much more than what is already given to them. These funds have been used against our people, our country, we the people. Thank you, Chrissa, for your observations and comments. Mike, I think you might have something to say on this one.
Well, I mean, it's certainly a revival of the true Monroe Doctrine. And it's worth noting the kind of subtleties in this new national security strategy. Trump calls it the Trump corollary. And that's basically, I think, revising or ending what was the Teddy Roosevelt corollary. As much as people think Trump is adopting this kind of walk softly and carry a big stick of Teddy Roosevelt, of gumboat diplomacy, Trump is actually going back to the original intent of John Quincy Adams and President Monroe. He's going back to a system of sovereign nation states and a question of those nations' responsibility. As Trump said it in his UN speech in the first term, and subsequently, is to develop the people of their country. That's their fundamental responsibility. That's what it means to gain the consent of the governed and have a sovereign functioning nation. And that's what Trump is basically implementing in the United States. He doesn't have to give a long theoretical justification to it. His actions demonstrate that. And he's basically demanding, he talked to the president of Colombia, and he basically said, what's going on with the cocaine? Why are you allowing this to take place? And apparently he's invited the president up to the United States, to Washington, for a summit. Trump is putting pressure on these guys to say, look, you can be better. Stop operating in this globalist context. I'm personally, from Trump's standpoint, fighting a war against the globalists. Why don't you join me in that? And I think, when you listen to President Putin's remarks, when they talked at one of the big, I think it was an SCO or some relevant summit to the Eurasian countries, President Putin said that there is no one talking bad about no head of state is talking bad about President Trump's actions. They all recognize Trump is waging a necessary and critical fight that would benefit both our country and theirs by ending this globalist regime. And that's what the revival of the Monroe Doctrine is. In terms of Israel, Israel can be both a globalist operation, or it can be a demonstration of a real nation-building project. And the question for Israel is to get back to building the nation, not constantly expanding to greater Israel, but building what they have as Israel as a nation state, and collaborate in a system of nation states within the kind of Arabic community in Southwest Asia. That's the question. And I think Trump has made it clear, he makes it clear in his national security strategy, no longer are we backing any globalist agendas out of Israel. And you see that already in terms of relationships with Syria, with Turkey, with Saudi Arabia. And I think Trump's putting his foot down. These globalist antics end, and he's not messing around.
Yeah, and I think one other aspect to this, I think it's important to think about. With Trump is essentially now saying to other South American leaders, and I suspect this was the subtext of his discussion with the Colombian president, hey, we have your back now against these narco-terrorists. We've never had their back. In fact, the United States, as long as it's been, the dumb giant for the British Empire, has essentially facilitated the takeover of many of these countries by narco-terrorist operations. I'll just mention one family in relationship to that. It's called the Bush family. There's a longer history there. But what Trump is now saying to these countries is, and the post that Trump put out after talking to the Colombian president, was very warm in the sense that you've explained your situation to me. And what is the situation? These leaders are under the gun. He said it about the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. She's terrified of the cartels. Well, of course. I mean, I don't remember the number, but it's thousands of people are killed. Political people and law enforcement people are killed in Mexico by the cartels all the time. Somebody decides that they want to run as mayor for some little village and not have it run by the cartels. Well, good luck with that. You and your family are probably dead, within a couple of days. So, for Trump to say, and this is the real implementation of the Monroe Doctrine, because if you really want to look at the foreign occupation of the Western Hemisphere, it is Dope Incorporated, it is the narco-terrorists, and it is the financiers that are behind them. And Trump is now saying to people, we got your back. I'm not necessarily endorsing this analysis, but I've seen some people say that the extraction of Maduro was a negotiated extraction because that was the only way he was actually going to be able to get out of that situation. I'm not endorsing that, but it's worth thinking about from the standpoint of what these South American leaders are actually up against.
Thank you very much, Susan and Mike, for your answers, for your conversation. The next question we're going to take is we're going to come back to domestic issues now. And we're going to talk about, it was just announced in the last 48 hours that Trump is going to immediately try and prevent. Let me just read the next 2 questions. Hi, with President Trump not allowing investment companies to purchase single-family homes and not allowing defense contractors exorbitant salaries and dividends to shareholders, is this the dagger in the heart to the banking cartels and British overlords that it appears will end their money flow, as well as the crooked Washington investors in the military-industrial complex scrambling to stay alive now? Thank you. Thank you, Tim J. from Ohio, for your question. Excuse me. And David, President Trump has announced he has plans to ban big business from buying single-family homes. In one incredible action, he is stopping the globalist dream of buying everything while telling people you will own nothing and be happy. Thank you, David, and thank you, Tim, for your questions and comments here. Mike and Susan.
You guys have hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is a very, very powerful move, but of course it's not in isolation. He's also saying we've got to go after the insurance cartels, the HMOs, from the same standpoint. He's announced his agriculture department is going after the beef cartels. So when you look at it, Trump is actually going at the concentration of imperial power in each of these areas. Now, how rapidly is it going to dry up the financial flows to the British overlords? I'm certain it's going to affect them. I'm certain it's going to weaken them. But I think the biggest impact of this, if people are thinking about it properly, is the political impact of it. Because here you have Donald Trump defending the American people from the big corporations. Now, that used to be the way the Democratic Party portrayed itself. And, as Trump said to the Republicans that he met with yesterday, these were Republican House members, he said, you will own these issues if you follow my lead and do what needs to be done. So, yeah, I think these are huge developments. And I think the potential implication is bigger immediately, politically, than it even will be economically. Although I will say that I think BlackRock's stock dropped by like 9% yesterday after this was announced.
I'll just add, Trump going after the military-industrial complex, he made that statement actually in his first term, which was somewhat revolutionary in terms of going after the MIC. He went after Raytheon, targeted them directly. But it's not just the military-industrial complex. This is our entire deregulated financial economy. They've basically been running stock buybacks, dividend payoffs. Even during COVID, all this money went to things like the airline companies or Boeing and these other companies tied to travel and just actual economy. And they went and did stock buybacks. These things used to be illegal. We used to have a regulated financial system that rewarded engagement and investment into physical production and basically decentivized this kind of financial racketeering. Trump's calling it out. We need a Republican Party. We need candidates. We need a midterm focus on these kinds of questions. And we all know it, wherever we are in the United States and elsewhere, local politicians, local political parties, state political parties are doing their darndest to try to stop and oppose this kind of economic agenda. We've just got to get stronger and louder in terms of how much we focus on this.
Thank you, Mike and Susan. I was queuing up some stuff here. All right. Let's continue here with the domestic issues. So next one here is going to be on healthcare. Here we go. Simple. Thank you, Stephen, for your simple question here. What is Donald Trump's plan to make health insurance better for Americans?
Well, he was pretty clear in these discussions with Republicans yesterday. He said no more money to the insurance companies. When you look at the evolution of this, of course, everybody knows Obamacare is an abomination, that costs have skyrocketed, life expectancy and the quality of healthcare has tanked ever since it happened. But I think to really answer your question, you have to go back to the You have to go back a little bit further, because our health insurance industry got completely morphed into a financialized parasite, going all the way back to 1973 with the establishment of HMOs. And I think this is where Trump is probably really, really poking the bear. Because prior to 1973, some of the people on this call who are younger than I am might not even know this. You did not have to negotiate your health care through a health maintenance organization or insurance company. You just went to your doctor, he treated you, you submitted the claim to the insurance company, just like your house insurance. You don't negotiate with your insurance company over, how you're going to repair your house. You repair your house as needed, you submit the claim to the insurance company, and hopefully they pay it. I mean, they are shysters when they can get away with it. But since 1973, with the HMOs, which came in right after the end of the Bretton Woods system, which was really the breaking point in 1971, where we began financializing everything. This was the step which basically said healthcare is not about delivering healthcare. Healthcare is about delivering a financial income stream to the insurance companies and the HMOs. And what Trump is saying by, in these statements that he made yesterday, is we need to break that model. We need to give the money to the American people, and they're going to figure out how to spend that to make themselves healthy. Now, there's things that are being discussed, where you could set up a health collective perhaps and completely avoid the insurance companies and the HMOs the way they're currently constituted. I think how that's going to work itself out is going to take a little bit of time. But I think Trump's intention is this very bold attack on this entire model from that standpoint. That's one side of it. The other side of it is, we probably don't have enough skilled people to take care of us, because so much of the health insurance, this whole scam has shifted a huge amount of activity to administrative support and so on. So, we're going to need to shift the balance. And of course, as Bobby Kennedy Jr. and the rest of the administration is doing, shift the balance in an even more fundamental way, which is to actually make people healthy again by changing all of the destructive practices, many of whom have been pushed by the insurance companies to make sure that we stay sick so that they can get a huge profit. So I think the details are going to have to unfold themselves as the days go forward. But I think the statement of intent by Trump yesterday was really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, to emphasize Susan's last point on this Maha question, implicitly what Trump is saying, look, the American people need to take more responsibility in governing their country and in governing their own health. That's just the reality of it. For too long, the American people have been bludgeoned with globalist shutdowns of jobs and manufacturing in towns, and basically turned to the government to say, hell, or insurance companies or the doctors, make me feel better, make me healthy as my diet gets worse, as I eat more, I basically eat more junk food, less red meat, less whole milk. You look at what the Kennedy put out yesterday. Susan mentioned it, the new food pyramid, healthy fats, healthy proteins, not a lot of grains. I mean, in some sense, this insurance company has been making money off of making the American people sicker. And no one's going to make you healthy but you. No one's going to have and run. We can't have self-government. We can't run a country unless the citizens take responsibility to run it. It's putting power and responsibility back in the hands of the American people. Now, I'm not saying that makes a functioning healthcare system, but it certainly gives us the ability to kick the daylights out of these parasites that have basically been making money off of us getting sicker and dying. And we can restructure, as Susan just said, a functioning healthcare system, especially ones where Americans are now healthier, more productive, and have the incomes necessary to actually live and eat, a healthy lifestyle. So I just think that's a big part of what Trump's fighting for. The Republicans should make that fight, and they should do exactly what Trump is saying. Kick against the pricks of these insurance companies, and don't let the Democrats keep bailing them out. Obamacare is a total racket.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give a quick shout out here. I want to take this one. I think this is an interesting side quest question here for a moment. Thank you, MDE845. Thank you for your super chat. Please make sure you're subscribed. Didn't Russia blockade England from helping the South during the Civil War? Was that simply a coincidence?
No, historically, Russia has always been an ally of the United States. The Empress Catherine was one of the key people in the League of Armed Neutrality in the Revolution. And as you say, in the Civil War, the Russian Navy protected our harbors both in New York and San Francisco from an English blockade. And if you look at the core of British geopolitical doctrine, they've always considered Russia, because it does straddle what they call the Eurasian heartland. It is a European and a very large European and Asian nation. It's always been their target. And Russia, from the start of our republic, had a certain resonance with what we were doing here. There's always been a kind of natural alliance. And if you look at many of the wars over the past 150 years, they've been wars which either directly or indirectly are a result of the fact that the British Empire is terrified of an actual US-Russian alliance.
Yeah, I would just say that the US-Russia relationship is probably the most important one to shape the 21st century.
I agree, Mike. Thank you. Okay. We can go in a few different areas now. Should we do, Susan or Michael, what topics we could do? Fusion. We could talk
some
about
of the ones around the midterm.
the midterm. Okay. Yeah, we do that. How about, yes, let's see hold on a second here. 20. Thank you everyone for tuning in too. Really appreciate all of you joining us every week. Okay. $27. Yes. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Randy, for this question. Why isn't President Trump leaning on Congress to move their butts on reconciliation? We want to see the hard work of Elon Musk come into fruition.
Well, I might take issue with your presumption that he's not leaning on Congress. I mean, he's leaning on Congress for a whole lot of stuff. He's got to, I think, choose his most important battlefields. He's done that on a couple of fronts. One is the filibuster. That is a gigantic roadblock for all sorts of things that he's trying to get done. So he's leaning on the Senate very, very hard to get rid of the filibuster. He's leaning on the Congress very hard on some of the election reform things. And I know there's a lot of questions, that are popping up about election integrity. He wants the Congress to take action on that. And as he said yesterday, he wants people to go on the offensive in terms of these kind of revolutionary policies that we're just talking about. He's going to be facing another government shutdown potentially at the end of the month.
Here, Susan, let me add this other question here, which I think will be a good one to go along with it because they're kind of similar in the way you're going to respond to them. Mm-hmm. Here, this one's from Randy. We all know we need a huge win in the midterms. Why isn't the RNC or key figures like Newt Gingrich pushing something like the contract with America or propping up or supporting Republican representatives? So I think these two kind of get at the same thing of why isn't Congress, why isn't the RNC seem to be doing anything?
You're going to have to ask them. The more important question is, what do we have to do? I mean, you're dealing with institutions which have a whole lot of entropy in them. whether it's the RNC, whether it's the existing Congress, and so on. I think, as people know, Mike and I are both active in the, Michigan Republican Party in different kinds of ways. And we know that these are not institutions that are very agile or are going to leap out in front of the fight. People have to think about how Donald Trump got elected in the first place and how he got reelected in 2024. We'll skip 2020 for the minute. He really created a new political force in the United States. It works to the degree that it needs to through the Republican Party, but it's really a Trump movement in the United States, which exercises clearly, the ability to steamroll over everything they threw at us in 2024. That has to grow. And dealing with these questions of why isn't the Congress doing something or other? I mean, really save your breath when it comes to the RNC. They'll do the kinds of things that the RNC does. Be happy if they do those kinds of things well, and don't really worry about it beyond that. The question is, what are you doing on the ground? Are you active in some way? Are you active in your local Republican Party? And Mike and I both know these can be very boring kinds of operations where you sit there going through a meeting with Robert's Rules of Order and all sorts of nonsense. Maybe that's a place where you can have impact just to make sure you're plugged in to whether it's door knocking or being a poll watcher or a poll worker or some kind of get out the vote operation. People have to find their niche somewhere soon in 2026 in terms of what you're going to do, because it's what you're doing right now, which is going to say to the existing Congress, these are the people that I'm going to have to answer to. These are the people who are going to decide whether I'm coming back as a congressman in 2026. And I may have to adjust how I'm acting today. You're the operative person in this. If you listen to Trump's address to the Republican congressman, you heard him say, I'll get a phone call at 3 a.m. in the morning, from Mike Johnson saying, well, here's a list of 6 people you're going to have to wake up and basically beat the crap out of, to make sure that they vote the right way. This man is doing everything he needs to do. The question is, what are you doing?
Yeah, and I would just add, I think, as much as the Republican Party and a lot of the Congress are a big part of the problem, as Susan just laid out, Trump realizes that Trump is pulling together the team that won in 2024. We're pulling together Elon Musk. He's going to have J.D. Vance, who's running the finances of the RNC. Trump himself has a huge chest of funding that he's pulled together. I mean, he was fundraising the day after the election, knowing this day was going to come for the midterms. He's going to have people like RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz out there going through to the places that are really core or districts that are going to be key with the Maha vote to give them a sense. They've changed the vaccine schedule. They've changed the food pyramid. They've changed, pricing on pharmaceuticals, most favored nation. All these questions are going to be out there. You're going to have a whole team of people campaigning about what this administration has accomplished with a big war chest. Obviously, Musk brings in a huge component. He did a lot in Pennsylvania in 24. So I think we shouldn't operate that somehow we're dependent on the Republican Party. Trump has built an operation and a movement. We are a critical part of that. And I think we've got to deploy effectively from that standpoint. We can win these midterms. What Trump is saying is that if we don't, it's going to be you, the Republicans, and the Congress who are the problem, because they won't get rid of the filibuster. They won't put the legislation through. But the way I view it, we're in the midst of a huge regime change. We're not done yet. We got to keep going.
Thank you very much, guys. And thank you, everyone in the chat. I'm reading every comment that's coming in. Some of you guys have really nice things to say. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. Here, let's put it up. So this person literally, as I was saying, this popped up. None of your business. 34. Love you all. Thank you very much to brother or sister. Please make sure you're subscribed to our free newsletter and the YouTube channel. We really appreciate the support. We don't have corporate sponsors. We don't take political money. We are almost completely reader and viewer funded. Thank you very much. Jeff in Utah, thank you for joining us every week. I enjoy seeing Promethean co-brand with other online sources to increase exposure, i.e. Crypto Rich. Crypto Rich is an exceptional person. He's really awesome. Susan's very good friends with him now. Thank you for joining us every week, Jeff. We really appreciate it. I'm sure you're already getting our newsletter, but make sure you do. And here's one for you, Mike. Jay Cramrod, good to see you here, Mike, and so happy to see your shaving wound has healed. How successful do you all think we will be in acquiring Greenland? Mike?
I appreciate that. Last Monday show, for those of you who don't know, I had a bit of a shaving cut that just wouldn't stop. I think that ultimately Trump's foreign policy is going to be ultimately successful. Greenland will become independent of European control. It will operate as a core part of U.S. hemispheric security. Will put more pressure on Canada, which also has to shift drastically. I think, and the big question, as I've said, is that the U.S.-Russia dynamic. And if you look back at that polar map, you see U.S.-Russia collaboration in the Arctic. Greenland's going to play a big part in that.
Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you everyone for the support. Okay, we have so many questions here to take. Let's continue on this topic of organizing, because I think this is so important to everyone. And this next one, I'm sure we'll have a lot to say on it. Okay. Thank you very much, Eddie. I feel confident that most MAGA people hear, read, and watch the information supporting our points of view, but the left progressives are not looking at those sites. How do we get our word on unfriendly podcasts, mainstream media, and the like? They're still listening to the same old lies. Those are the people that need to hear, watch, and read other formats. We must succeed. Thank you, Eddie from Arkansas, and thank you for joining us.
Well, I don't know if we're going to break through enemy lines and get on mainstream media, but I think happily, there's an entire media ecosphere out there through social media where you can have an enormous impact, outside of the controlled, the controlled media. But I think there's a certain conceptual question to this, which is extremely important, which is for people to think through what happens as your neighbors who may not be pro-Trump at the moment. Hopefully they don't have a full-blown case of TDS, one of those people who's somewhere in the middle. What happens if they start seeing the effect of Trump's policies? What happens if a factory breaks ground somewhere around them and they or their neighbors actually have the opportunity to get a good paying job, either building the factory or ultimately working in the factory? What happens if they see maybe the teenage kid of their best friend at church deciding to go to a trade school and coming out within 60 days, with a HVAC or a CNC license, and immediately being able to start a kind of productive job? Or, any of the other things that Trump, obviously the administration focuses quite a bit on the decrease in taxes that people are going to start to feel in 2026 as the one big beautiful bill kicks in, where people can reduce their withholding taxes because they're not going to be paying as much, and other things on that side. But I think much more fundamentally, the real way that you combat this brainwashing world of the mainstream media is just make sure that people are out in the real world, where you're going to start to begin to see the effects of this transformation of our economy. The brainwashing kind of works. It's sort of like if you're in a mental concentration camp and you see nothing else, no way out, and then they've kind of got you. But once you get out of that and you're and you see that something is changing, I frankly think that's how we're going to break it. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to, get interviewed by Kristen Welker or something like that.
Sounds awful.
Yeah.
I would just say that I think there's two core demographics. One is these blue collar voters. Trump has touched them. We've got to continue. They're not a consolidated base. We didn't win it entirely, but we had huge gains under Trump's ending NAFTA, ending globalization, bringing back manufacturing. They're now putting real policies to bear on that. I think that grouping has to be outreach to, and then especially young men. They are extremely politicized, especially on areas like immigration. They see the threat to the culture, to their jobs, to the economy, to home ownership. I think we've got to continue to reach out to some of these areas because we've got a chance to pull together a coalition that's 60, 70% of the population, of the electorate. We've just got to make a breakthrough on these economic questions. I think Trump knows it.
And let me just mention, there have been a couple of people in the chat encouraging us to be in touch with Stephen Gardner. I recorded a show with him yesterday, so it should be out there soon.
Thank you, everyone, for making that happen, too. We know there are so many people out there that are just sharing our content on every single social media platform. I just had somebody say that they ran into us from a Telegram chat. Right? That's one of the most seedy places on like the internet you can get to. I'm very happy that we're showing up on Telegram. Channels are reposting us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Eddie, let me just say one thing because I think about this question a lot. You're going about it the wrong way, right? Forget about trying to like bite on the ankles of some unfriendly podcast or some mainstream media. Forget about doing that. The way that you change a society is through the principle of leadership. You, by acting like a leader and doing the hard but necessary things, you will attract people just from being a leader. And it's the principle of leadership that people don't want to assume, because leadership is challenging. Leadership means responsibilities. But it's taking on those responsibilities and taking on the leadership roles. That's what changes society. Forget about the people, the leftists that their brains are cooked. It might take generations of families before their family brain becomes collectively uncooked, right? Focus on taking real leadership actions locally and attracting people that like and support your leadership, and work on bringing those people up to the same levels as you are. If MAGA just did that, you're going to attract people that their brains aren't fully cooked. For the people that are fully cooked, don't worry about that. There's a 5 to 10, 15% of the populations that brains haven't been fully cooked. It's like this middle thing, right? And by taking leadership yourself on local things and national things, state level things, if you can, taking leadership will attract people, and attracting those people is ultimately what's going to win those elections. I see we just got another super chat. Let me take it here from another friend of ours. Oorah, Grunt 8286. Happy belated New Year to my Promethean anti-British government superheroes. Oorah, man. I just took down James Bond in the backyard. Love you. Love you too, brother. Thank you so much for the support and joining us every week. Okay, let's keep taking these questions, because I think it's good to know that people are literally struggling with this question right now all across the world. This is just another example of it. Let me take down this comment here. Okay, and I just saw a comment in the chat asking about Canada, people asking about UK. So I'm trying to take this question from the standpoint of a citizen of the world. What can we as citizens do to help President Trump more effectively defeat the globalists other than vote for him? So Randall, thank you for this question. Again, we're getting more and more questions. I have another 10 questions that are like this. So Susan or Mike, your thoughts on this question?
Well, I will come back to the fact that people have to figure out, how can I actually become active? Last week, we mentioned that if you go to the Promethean Action website, send us a message, let us know where you are. If you want to become active, We can see if there's other people in your area, whether we have an operation on the ground in these areas themselves, or simply make suggestions in terms of what you can do. Because what is going to be key in the 2026 midterms in terms of breaking through all the PSYOPs operations, and that's, as we've said, that's what this thing in Minnesota is really all about, create a polarizing situation, increase the chaos, increase the violence. I mean, it's not unlike the Epstein files, get people completely fixated on something which you have, misdefined in terms of its actual importance and its role in the whole thing. What we have to do is what Trump said yesterday. Take the fight to the enemy, hit hard at their weaknesses, which is that the Democratic Party is actually run by the big, rich corporations. This is not your grandfather's Democratic Party that used to support blue-collar workers. And magnify the Trump movement as the new party of the majority of Americans and blue-collar workers. Bring people into this new political realignment in the world. And Adam, this is the point at which I do the Promethean PAC commercial break. Okay. Here's one thing concretely everybody can do. We've said this before. Some of you may be joining us for the first time. Promethean Action is a policy arm, but we also have a political action committee, which will be directly intervening into the midterm elections. And at this link, which he's just put on the Promethean PAC website, including the QR code, we have a half-page flyer, which is going to be the first of a series of half-page flyers. I've already got an idea cooking in my head for the second one right now. But thank you, Adam is showing you. It's just a nice little half-page flyer, because I keep forgetting to here at my desk, as I should have. If you go to the website, you can either download a printer-friendly version, or for like $23, you could order 100 copies of this, and it goes up from there in terms of that. Have these with you. They're great conversation starters with people. Do you know that this is a new Republican Party? Do you know that this is a party which is now supporting working people and the middle class? And on the back of it, it shows the difference between the new Republican Party and the old Republican Party of Wall Street and war. So this is something that people can use right now to get out and start organizing. And as I say, you can either purchase these nice color copies from us or get them for a donation, or you can download a printer-friendly copy and just do it on your inkjet printer, and think about how to actually organize with this. This coming a week from tomorrow, for people who actually are getting copies of this and are out there organizing, we're going to be doing a special organizing call for people who want to get their hands dirty in terms of organizing. So make sure you're subscribed to Promethean Action and you let us know where you are so that we can appropriately invite you into this kind of activity. And as I say, this is just going to be the first of several. We're going to provide you with the kind of material that you need to go out there and bring reality to bear. And let people know what Trump is actually doing, like the fact that in November alone, we broke ground on over 400 factories, processing facilities, and warehouses in the United States. New construction on 400 just in November alone. And things are just getting geared up at this point. So again, I think this is the key to the midterms. Bring people into reality, not, rage fits on social media, not color revolution, psyops on your news feed and so on. Get them into the real world, discussing real economics. How do we rebuild this country? What is it that Trump is actually doing? And is my congressman or my state representative or the announced congressional candidates actually behind this?
Thank you, Susan. I just want to say a few quick things about this. There's a black and white version of this. It's also available at the link or the QR code. Sorry, the page is a little messy. I'm working on that website. But there's a black and white version of this that's completely free. You can print, and we have color versions of this available. They're great conversation starters. So check out the link. I think the link should also be in the description, but I'm not exactly sure. I'll add that later regardless. So you can get the link there, prom.ac midterm 26, or at the QR code above. Okay, let's do a quick, awesome super chats here. First one here from Pray Warrior 8973. Thank you very much for the super chat. Let me read it here. My mom has gone on to the Lord. Sorry to hear that. But she would have loved you all for what you're doing. She is Scottish but raised in London, but the new monarchy was corrupt. She told me that. Blessings to each of you. And blessings to you, Pray Warrior. Please make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. Our next video is coming out on Saturday, and we really appreciate the support. And also one from Mr. Can Do For You. Thank you very much. Our greatest strength is in our numbers. That's only going to happen through our level-headed knowledge and Promethean, and when they lie, we can calmly dispel the lie. Thank you, Mr. Can Do For You. We really appreciate the support. Okay. Do you want to continue on this, or do you want to? I can switch to some more international topics if that's what you.
Hey, Adam, there were two questions toward the end which I highlighted in bold, which were simply asking for resources, which we can answer really quickly, like 56 or 57.
Yeah, hold on a second.
They were just asking for references, and they were useful references. We can share them with everybody.
The conservative treehouse one?
No, it was, I know what one of them was. I can just freestyle it. Somebody was asking where you can get the quotes from Franklin Roosevelt's fight with Winston Churchill.
Yes, okay. Now I totally have that one. Yes. Sorry, guys. I guess we had over 100 questions, and I have like 60 of them loaded up and paraphrased and everything. So yes, let me pull it up. I totally got you on that question. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Catherine, for this question. We have plenty to say on this. This is something that everyone can study. Love the work you're all doing. I heard you reference a couple of times when FDR plainly told Winston Churchill in so many words that the U.S. was not going to help the U.K. reign in over its lost crown territories, but only to help fight off the Germans. Where can I find that resource? That is from a book, As He Saw It, from Elliot Roosevelt. Maybe I'm going to go pull that up. So I'm going to go pull up that book, because that's the definite resource you're talking about. I tried finding it, no avail, and when I told it to a family member, they didn't believe it. This is a perfect example of why Americans need to understand how the City of London is trying to keep the USA a colony and not the independent nation we thought we gained in 1785. Thank you very much, Catherine. Let me pull it up. But Susan or Mike, resources on this question?
Well, that's what I wanted to identify. It's this book by Elliot Roosevelt. Try and find the first edition. I think they monkeyed a little bit with later editions. And it's really quite straightforward in terms of two worldviews between Franklin Roosevelt and Churchill. Churchill wanted to maintain the empires, and which Roosevelt described as any system which takes more out of a country than it puts back in. And Roosevelt wanted to come out of World War II in a world where the colonies were being freed, and as he put it, with American methods of investment in modern agriculture, water, transportation, and so on, these third world countries would actually begin to develop. I mean, it's what Mike referenced earlier in terms of Mexico. The intention of the Mexicans was to use their oil reserves to modernize, to develop nuclear power, to become a modern industrial country. the purpose of the empire, and the person who implemented that at that time was Henry Kissinger, was to keep Mexico backward, use their financial machinations and so on to suck the lifeblood out of these countries, install the narco-terrorists. Those are the two different systems. And that book by Elliot Roosevelt, especially the final summits between, the final summits between Roosevelt and Churchill are extremely, will be extremely revelatory to people in terms of what we're saying about the difference between the British Empire and the American system.
Guys, it's available on Internet Archive. There's a public domain version of this book. So this is a resource that everyone can start really reading and digging into. But that's where all the quotes about, you're not going to have it your way, Winston, and all that, I think a lot of it came from Elliot Roosevelt, which is FDR's son, as he saw it. So that was the resource. Mike, any thoughts?
You're muted, Mike.
Sorry about that. It always stands out to me that Elliot wrote this book because he saw that there was a direct compromise towards his father's foreign policy once Truman came in. The globalists moved hard and fast. And there are a number of American accounts, including our founder, Lyndon LaRouche's, but a number of people saw that the culture inside the United States, within the few years after World War II, we were changing. Vell, the old senator, he was the guy that released the Pentagon Papers. If you ever go and read the Pentagon Papers, even the Rand Corporation, which wrote those, kind of evaluating the war in Vietnam, said that the reason the war started was because in 1945, the United States compromised its traditional American foreign policy to oppose colonialism, and we shifted and supported it with the French in Vietnam. I would just say one other thing is that I think what Elliot Roosevelt's responding to, I think what FDR intended and was responding to, but certainly I think what a lot of us are responding to, is that we know we need a fundamental cultural shift in our country and in our civilization. I said it earlier, the British Empire was the greatest wrecking force of Western civilization. And this has been a fight that some people saw within the years after World War II. As much as some people celebrate it was a heyday of material success, it was. But there was already a cultural breakdown. So people ask, what can we do? Especially people because we have so many people watching from around the world. We're part of rebuilding Western civilization. And that is a question of a deep cultural and spiritual question as much as it is a political and economic one. And we're asking, our sense is, we're going to have a class this Saturday on the questions of a Christian Renaissance. But there's no doubt that we need to recreate what took place in like the 15th century of Europe, this kind of great awakening, a burgeoning of new science, of beautiful art, of beautiful architecture, of industry, of the developments of advanced language and poetry, of industry, of technology, the Da Vinci's, the infrastructure, the canals, ultimately the founding of the United States in the sense of self-government. We need to recreate that kind of Christian Renaissance, that kind of revival. And I think that's part of our intention, and it's part of what every individual can do, is to live a very devoted and disciplined life, committed to this kind of question, because in some sense, that's where our country and these principles stem from.
Thank you very much, Mike. Whoops, wrong one. I want to take this next one here from Bob. You do great work, and it is critically important as your following grows. I am new, found you by Conservative Treehouse. We newbies need a 101 class as to how the British Empire can still exert and has exerted such control over U.S. and its policies. When I try to get others to listen, one, I do not do an effective job at explaining it, and two, people think the concept is too unbelievable. We need a 101 class as to how it happened and how it still works. Thanks in advance. Thank you, Bob, for reaching out to us and being honest about this. I would say the best way to understand it is if you were college educated in the last, I don't know how many years, decades, you probably didn't study the American system of economics in your classes. you probably did not study Alexander Hamilton to the extent that we would like to mandate it in college economics education, but you probably studied British economics. All the schools still teach British concepts. Right? That the educational influence alone shows the British hand pretty hard.
No, I think Adam kind of is going in the right direction in terms of this, because I think the problem that a lot of people have is precisely that, to the extent that America had a different kind of economic policy called the American system, which was not based on money. It was based on production, increasing our physical output through the intervention of more productive individuals, through science, through technology, through better education, and so on. You can't show people that we've been living in this British imperial world from the standpoint of all of their rules, economically, educationally, strategically, and so on, unless you can give them a picture of something else. Now, one of the games they play is, they create phony binary choices. Well, you're either capitalist or you're a communist. Or, one of the latest bugaboos, you're either for Israel or you're against Israel. But we'll put that aside for the moment because we're talking about economics. Well, before anybody ever used the word capitalism, before anybody popularized the word communism, the fight was understood to be between the American system of political economy, as Adam said, founded by Alexander Hamilton, and the British imperial system. And again, go back to that the Roosevelt quotes that we were referencing, because it's actually a good, simple concept. The difference between a system that takes more out than it puts in, which is what free trade did to our economy, what financial parasites do, what the British East India Company did historically, that takes more out, versus a system that invests so that you can actually become more productive. Now, I think when you become more comfortable in thinking through the implications of those two systems, you'll be more effective in contrasting to people what's wrong with our current system. But unless you have that idea of the American system, and it is what Trump is doing, he doesn't put it in the terms we do it. And I think it has to be put in the terms we do, the actual historical specificity of these policies. It is hard to explain to somebody, you're again, it's sort of like you're living in a box and you're living in a basement and you've never been told, well, this is actually Plato's cave, from the Republic. You're chained to a bench in a cave. All you see, and there's a light behind you, and all you see are the shadows on the wall, because all you can see is that cave wall, and all you're seeing is the shadows from the light behind you. You have to think about the fact that when you're talking to people, that's their circumstance. You're trying to say to them, oh, these shadows on this wall, that's not the way the world really is, or the shadows on this wall are bad. You don't like the shadows on this wall. And the person is sitting there saying, well, the only thing I've ever seen is the shadows on this wall. What are you talking about? This has got to be how the world works, because that's all I see. And then you take their chains off them and you take them out of the cave and they go into the fresh air and they see there's sun and trees and, a whole actual living world, which is not generated by the shadows. That's you in your organizing, you're thinking of, how do I get people out of that cave and out where they're actually looking at the real world? And the American system and the physical economic growth, which Donald Trump is unleashing with his policies, is a first good step, in terms of getting people out there.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, some quick super chat shout outs here. First, I want to give a quick shout out to RSA. Don't buy As You Saw It. Don't buy that book from Amazon. I don't think the books, that version was the old print. You can get the old print book. It's available public domain on Internet Archive if you just search for how he saw it. Okay, I also want to give a quick shout out here to Oreo de Pup. I think you're a little bit confused here, but I'll read this comment. Legacy of World War II, the whole thing is fishy and reeks in London. I know the painter, Adolf Hitler, was a spy who infiltrated the party. No, I think it's a little bit worse than just a spy who infiltrated the party. Wall Street and London funded him, but mainstream says it was isolated racists. Well, the thing with Hitler is that it was more than just racism. It was a much bigger project than just racism.
Yeah.
It was an economic project, first of all. So I think you have a very baseline understanding of what you're talking about. I urge you to actually start doing some more research.
Adam, I think he's saying that. I think he's saying that it was the mainstream says it was isolated racist, but really it was a big, like you're saying, a bigger economic project.
Any thoughts?
Well, this is a longer discussion, which we probably aren't going to start right now. But I would reference people to my Wednesday update yesterday, where I talked about somebody who's probably not as well known as Adolf Hitler, but extremely significant in Nazi Germany, and that's the finance minister Hjalmar Schacht.
Hjalmar Schacht.
And Schacht was a protege of Bank of England head Montague Norman. He was groomed on Wall Street by the Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan interests. And he's the person who implemented the bankers' economic policy for Germany, which at first was to loot the German people in order to keep paying the reparations debts and other things to the Western bankers. But at a certain point, it simply became an even more effective way of looting the German people and many other people to feed the German war machine. So, you know, the issue of Nazi Germany is not a trivial issue, obviously, and we can maybe take it up in more detail. But I did reference the Hjalmar Schacht question yesterday in my show, and made direct reference to certain Nazi origins of Obamacare. So you might want to take a look at that.
All right. I think I'm going to take one final question here from our friend over in Berkeley Springs, kind of close to where I am. What do you recommend for effective ways to contact our congressmen to educate them about what's really taking place in order to get them on board with Trump and MAGA? Phone, text, email, snail mail them, pack literature, refer them to your video updates. I want to help. What can I do? Thank you, Dennis. So final question for today. What would you guys recommend for somebody who's trying to take action and really change their congressman?
I would start with a phone call. I would try and actually establish a personal relationship with somebody in the local office or somebody in the DC office on these fundamental policy questions. Back in the day, back in the 1970s and the 80s, I used to do that. I was in Washington, DC, and had tons and tons of personal relationship with staff on Capitol Hill. It's different today. First of all, the congressmen tend to be an order of magnitude more controlled and stupid than they were back in the 1970s. But still, I think that question of trying to make some kind of personal connection, find out where the closest local office is. Find out, look, your congressmen are going to be running all over the place campaigning for reelection. Get on their campaign email list. Yes, you're going to get a whole bunch of fundraising asks, but you can just ignore them. Find out where they're going to show up. See if you can actually, intersect them. Ask them an appropriate question. Shake their hand. Hand them one of our flyers. That being said, Mike, why don't you tell them about what we have planned for April?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I think what you said is absolutely right. And I think that their idea of referring people to our video updates is actually a very good idea, especially the staff in the local offices. Get people just talking, about these ideas around the congressman. It'll have an impact. So I think that's a good idea. But we're also to join us in Washington. We've now, over the course of 2025, we did 2 trips, one in April and one, I think, in October. to Washington, D.C. And as Susan said, we've been lobbying and organizing members of Congress going back to the 70s. So we know that there's a certain way that DC is structured, but you can't take it for granted. We are one of the only countries you can walk into elected members of the federal Congress and talk to their staff, run into them into the hallways. We were known as the Red Hat Brigade because we went in there with our MAGA hats, ready to basically organize them. Congressmen saw us in elevators and hallways, wanted to engage and talk. We had a number of extensive discussions with them in October, mostly with their staff. That was when the shutdown was taking place. So we had a number of discussions with staff members, a lot of younger people, engaging them on the ideas, on the content of the videos. So if you're interested in Washington, we are in the process of setting up a trip in April. So you can certainly send in, and it'd be good to get a sense. It's good to talk about it on this show. If people are interested, to send us an email, let us know so we can get an idea of kind of what kind of logistics we might need. We might not be able to handle everybody, I mean, just to say that right now. But if you're interested, we definitely would like to know. And if you can't come, certainly we need an army of people making calls to their congressmen and senators, setting up meetings, engaging them in these ideas, getting appointments for us to go in there and meet with staff or the congressman, and make sure that we actually can start to orient these elected officials with the kind of ideas that all of us are discussing here on this show.
Thank you, Mike and Susan. So just to recap, we're going to be doing another congressional trip in the spring sometime, I believe in April. Please subscribe to our free email newsletter. We're going to be talking about this more. We're going to be letting people know how you can help. Last time we had people from across the country were able to secure me, even if people couldn't come with us to DC, they were able to secure meetings for us on their behalf, meetings with their congressmen and their senators. So we're going to be talking more about this trip in the coming weeks as we get closer in the spring. Make sure you're subscribed to our free newsletter. The link is in the description. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next week.